Granite is a rock that we have of abundance here in Georgia. If you can remember from our very first video, we talked about the Georgia Guidestones and about the granite that's in Elberton, Georgia. And throughout the state of Georgia, not just in Elberton, we have these mounds, these mountains that are made of granite. In fact, granite from the state of Georgia was used to build the U.S. Capitol building as well as the U.S. Treasury. Not only is granite a very solid and stable material to build with, but it also has metaphysical properties as well. For example, if you wear a granite amulet, you could supposedly, allegedly, increase your physical health and well-being. You could also attract more abundance and wealth. You see, granite releases a high electromagnetic field, or EMF. People who are not so spiritual will tell you that the EMF causes people to have hallucinations sometimes. However, people that fall more on the spiritual side will say, actually, the EMF gives spirits the energy they need to appear. These granite mountains that are around Georgia are also home to a lot of mystical cults. For example, Arabia Mountain, that is outside of Atlanta, is a mountain that we tend to hike a lot, and we'll often see pentagrams on the ground of people out there practicing whatever faith it is that they need to practice. You see, these stone mountains can act as chargers with the EMF, and so people believe that not only do this granite charge up our human bodies, but it also brings energy and electro charge to spirits and beings of other realms of reality. However, today we're going to focus on one granite mountain in particular. This mountain has played a huge part in Atlanta's history. It is also now a great source of recreation and amusement for the city. And for those of you who are fans of the TV series Stranger Things, this was a place used to film. And in fact, in a lot of the scenes in Stranger Things, you can see this granite mountain in the background. But before we get started, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and remember to tell your friends. All right, guys, welcome to Esoteric Atlanta. Today we are talking about Stone Mountain, Georgia. To understand the significance of Stone Mountain, we're going to have to go through a brief timeline of the mountain itself. Now, there are a lot of ghosts in this mountain, so I'm a little bit torn over which category to place this video. Do I put it in things to do in Atlanta, or do I put it in the category Ghost of Atlanta? I think I will actually be putting it in the category Ghost of Atlanta, even though this place is now a place of recreation. But let's get started. Stone Mountain is a rather large mountain. In fact, many times for me flying in and out of Atlanta, I look out my window and you can see Stone Mountain from high up in the distance. Stone Mountain used to be a very sacred place for the Native Americans. As I said in the introduction, granite is a huge charger and a place for many centuries, for many different faiths, of religious ceremony. In 1567, the Spanish explorer Juan Pardo found the mountain for himself as well. He was looking for the tribes that lived around the mountain. He called this mountain Crystal Mountain. Now, there's a lot of mysticism around this time period with exploration anyway. In a future video, we will talk about Ponce de Leon and his search for the Fountain of Youth. So they were looking for these Native Americans, trying to figure out what their mysticism was, what secrets they held. So a lot of these explorers were looking for elixirs and for magic that they believed was in this unruly, wild, new world. Reminds me a little bit of the story Tuck Everlasting that we had to read when we were children about the water that this family drinks that keeps them the same age forever. The whole point of the story is that the circle of life is very important, and to drink from this elixir that keeps you young forever is messing with the natural rhythm of nature. Now, fast forwarding into the 1700s, Stone Mountain became a landmark, and as I said earlier, I can see why. It's a huge mountain. You can see it from the sky. So it definitely was really important when they were trying to explore and expand on their colonization. Now, that wasn't fair to the natives that lived in the area, but that was what they used this mountain as. It was a landmark. And then fast forwarding again, in 1822, this mountain officially became a part of DeKalb County. Again, DeKalb County is one of our counties here in Atlanta. It's the same county that hosts Doll's Head Trail from a future or a past video. In 1847, the Granite Mountain officially became known as Stone Mountain, as it's been called ever since. And by 1850, Stone Mountain had developed its own town, its own ecosystem, its own community. They had a post office, they had some shops, they even had some beds and breakfasts or inns, especially the Village Inn Bed and Breakfast that's still around today. That was built around this time. Around this time also, they put a lookout up on top of Stone Mountain so that people could see incoming trains traveling in from Augusta. Stone Mountain became a stopping ground for people, for weary travelers heading west. But of course, as most of our stories, historical stories that are in Atlanta, in the 1860s, we had the Civil War. And again, just like in our Ellis Hotel story, in our Oakland Cemetery story, in our Barnsley Gardens story, and probably many more stories to come, in 1864, we had the Battle of Atlanta and we had the burning of Atlanta. Now, the Village Inn Bed and Breakfast that I mentioned previously turned into a Confederate hospital during this time. When the Union troops came through Stone Mountain, they did what is known as Sherman's neckties. So not only was Sherman responsible for burning down the South, he also would command his troops to go into these southern towns and pull up their train tracks and tie them around tree trunks. This was a way to stop incoming travelers or incoming commerce into the town, a way of crippling our economy, or their economy back in the day. And as we know, economy is very, very important for a civilization's survival. But nonetheless, the South rose again, as we know, and in 1868, a Reverend Jacob Stillwell purchased the Village Inn and Breakfast that was turned into a Confederate hospital. He moved himself, his wife, and his 9 children into this bed and breakfast, which became his home and his family's home for many, many years. And then in 1887, a man by the name of Samuel Venable purchased Stone Mountain for $48,000. That's well over $1 million today. Now, Sam Venable and his brothers owned companies that would use granite to export for buildings and for tools, for all sorts of stuff. So the purchase of Stone Mountain for him was one of enterprise. He wasn't necessarily looking to build a village or a town up around the mountain as the people prior to him. He wanted to make money off of this mountain. And as we get into the 1900s, the 20th century, we start to move into the modern stories and the modern tragedies of Stone Mountain, because Stone Mountain in our modern times experienced a very, very dark period that we have to talk about. We cannot do a video on Stone Mountain without talking about its association to the KKK or the Ku Klux Klan. In 1915, a man by the name of William Simmons, while recovering from an accident, decided that he wanted to create the Klan again. The Klan originally was created right after the Civil War, and then it went away, and then this man decided it was a good idea to bring it back. Apparently, he was inspired to do so because of the trial of Leo Frank. Leo Frank was a Jewish American man who owned some factories down here in Georgia. He seemed, from what I read, to be an extremely smart man and a very, very valuable asset to the Atlanta economic society. Unfortunately, at one of Mr. Frank's factories, a young girl at the age of 13 named Mary Fagan was found murdered in one of his factories. Now, around this time, there's a lot of things happening socially for our country. A lot of children are working in factories, and we're starting to realize that maybe it's not such a good idea to have children that young working in a labor-intensive job. And that's really good, because in today's society, children don't typically work like that, and if they do work, they have to have work permits given to them by the government. There's so many child labor laws now that prevent children for having to go through what Mary Fagan went through at such a young age. Now, as I was reading up on this case, something was pointed out multiple times. In Georgia, in the Southeast as a whole, you don't and you didn't see a lot of anti-Semitism. That wasn't common here in the Southeast. Now, of course, we've had our issues with racism and with hate crimes down here in the South, but for the Jewish population, that wasn't as common. But what seemed to happen here was that Mary Fagan was a Caucasian, a white child. And so when they arrested Leo Frank, it became an issue because they were persecuting somebody who hurt a white child. And I do feel really uncomfortable talking about this case, but I think it is really important that we continue to talk about these stories. Leo Frank, at the age of 31, was found guilty of Mary Fagan's murder. He was first given the death sentence, but then the governor of Georgia commuted his death sentence to life behind bars. Once word got out that Leo Frank's sentence had been changed to life behind bars, a mob of men stormed the prison and pulled Leo Frank out of the prison. They brought Leo Frank to Marietta, Georgia, which again was where our werewolf of Georgia lived in later life, where my sister lives. It's right outside of Atlanta, and they hung him. He was lynched. The men who killed him, who murdered him, called themselves the Knights of Mary Fagan. His murder happened on August the 16th of 1915. Now, in 1986, Leo Frank was pardoned for these crimes. And as far as I'm concerned, the death of Mary Fagan had two victims: our 13-year-old little girl and a 31-year-old young man who was completely innocent of the charges brought against him. And if you're in Marietta or ever find yourself in Marietta, there is a memorial plaque placed near where Leo Frank lost his life, honoring him and what happened to him. And I do hope, on a personal note, that both Leo Frank and Mary Fagan can rest in peace. So this whole trial, the mobbing of a young Jewish man, is what inspired William Simmons to recreate the KKK, or the Ku Klux Klan. The first phase of the Ku Klux Klan lasted from 1865 to 1871, post the American Civil War. And so he created this second phase of the KKK. When he was able to, he got some men and went to the very top of Stone Mountain and performed a ceremony, and in this ceremony he burned a cross. We now know that the burning of crosses is very common for the KKK. And in my opinion, if Jesus were alive today, he would be horrified at this. Absolutely horrified. Now, our old pal Sam Venable, who bought Stone Mountain in 1887, witnessed this ceremony happening on top of his mountain with William Simmons in the forming of the second round, the second phase of the KKK. And because he witnessed the ceremony, he gave the Klan permission and a permit to use Stone Mountain as their headquarters, their meeting spot. And it's such a dark phase in Atlanta's history. But again, this is such an important part of the telling of Stone Mountain's past that we have to include this part in our timeline. Now, in 1928, they started the construction of the monument, the memorial that is chiseled onto Stone Mountain today. And this is the chiseled memorial of the three men on horseback. These three men are Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, and Stonewall Jackson, all very important figures in the American Civil War for the Confederacy. Now, a little interesting fact about this chiseled monument within the stone is it didn't get finished until 1970. So it took a good amount of time to be able to finish this piece of work. And this stone art is bigger than Mount Rushmore, believe it or not. Now, in 1958, the state of Georgia took Stone Mountain, bought Stone Mountain. It now became a public piece of land. But the state still had a problem on its hands because the KKK still had a permit to use Stone Mountain as their headquarters. So the state got clever. The year 1958, when the state took Stone Mountain, they condemned it. So the Klan and anybody who had a permit to do business on Stone Mountain had to leave. It was condemned. And then in 1962, the state reopened Stone Mountain. They started to make it what we know it as today. When it reopened in 1962, they put in a scenic railroad that I've been on. I went on as a child that takes you around the park so you can see everything. These are also the railroad tracks that, again, you see in Stranger Things. They also opened up the Antebellum Plantation. The Antebellum Plantation is now known as Historic Square, which is this little village inside of Stone Mountain. We'll get more into Historic Square, the Antebellum Plantation, when we get into our ghost at the end of the story. Now, during the 1996 Summer Olympic Games in Atlanta, Stone Mountain hosted a few events. It hosted tennis, it hosted archery, and it hosted track cycling. Now, here's a funny story. So my family is a really big tennis family. I personally hate tennis. I'm not really a sports person though at all. And in fact, sometimes when I spell tennis balls now, I get a little bit nauseated. But we spent a lot of time as kids playing tennis, taking tennis lessons. And during the 1996 Olympics, I was 13 years old, and my sister, who was 4 years younger than me, was like 9. And we went to go see some of the tennis matches. Well, we went to go see this one tennis match at Stone Mountain where Mary Jo Fernandez, who is a famous United States professional tennis player, was playing. And tennis is a lot like golf in the sense that there are parts of the game where you get very quiet. Tennis, like golf, is considered a country club sport. Well, my sister, who was very young at the time, we were watching Mary Jo Fernandez play, and during this time where it got really quiet, my sister screamed out, "Let's go, Mary Jo." And her voice echoed throughout the whole stadium. Well, the next day we were at home watching recaps of the tennis portion of the Olympics, and the camera actually spanned to my sister and me because she had yelled out, "Let's go, Mary Jo." So this brings us to today's attractions at Stone Mountain. There's so much. I was actually surprised at how much there is to do at Stone Mountain. I don't go there that much. It's like that thing, when you live close to something, you hardly ever participate in it. In Stone Mountain, we go out sometimes to walk the dog or hike around, but as far as all the entertainment there, I was really surprised. So much to do. They have rides for the kids. They even have some water activities to do. Of course, you have all the museums and the antebellum plantation that we're going to get to in a minute. And you also have these laser light shows. I knew about the laser light shows. You can also hike the mountain. There are over 15 miles worth of hiking trails just in Stone Mountain alone, and there is one hike that you can do all the way up to the top of the mountain. It's a mile walk. If you don't want to do the walk, but you do want to go all the way up to the top of the mountain, you can take a lift up there. Now, they say that the top of Stone Mountain provides some of the greatest views of the skyline of Atlanta, Georgia. You can also see this skyline from Arabia Mountain as well, which again is the other granite mountain that's a good bit outside of the city. Stone Mountain itself is OTP, or outside the perimeter, and really is really close to the city. I actually consider Stone Mountain to be a part of Atlanta proper. Now, it's close to the airport as well. So for anybody coming in, they have hotels down there that you could stay in. The Village Inn bed and breakfast from the very beginning, which we'll talk about as well when we get back to our ghost. There's also neighborhoods around there now. Stone Mountain is its own incorporated city. There's beautiful homes, great school district. It really is a fantastic part of the city. A little bit of a dark history, but that's okay because it's cleaning up and it's becoming a really nice place to be. So let's get into some of those hauntings. So we're gonna go back. I'm gonna try to go in order because we got a lot of ghosts. A lot. And I don't know if it's because of the history and everything that's happened at Stone Mountain, or if we go back to the fact that it's granite. And granite has a high electromagnetic field. And so for these spirits, they can take from the granite to maintain their visibility and existence on this plane of existence. So let's go look at the Village Inn bed and breakfast. So if you can remember, the Village Inn bed and breakfast first was built around the 1850s when Stone Mountain was starting to become its own city. It was taking in travelers from Augusta, and then it became a hospital during the American Civil War in 1864 for the Confederate troops, and then it was bought by a reverend and his family. Well, in 1995, people started to renovate the inn in order to bring it back up to be another hotel for people. And as we know, or if you know, if you're familiar with paranormal phenomenon, then a lot of times renovations can stir things up. So I'm going to go through some documented accounts of things that happened during the renovation of the Village Inn bed and breakfast. So a lot of times things would get moved around. They couldn't explain why. And then they started to hear what sounded like an elderly gentleman singing and humming. And they would go outside to see if there was a homeless man around or something. I mean, there's a lot of woods around Stone Mountain, so I can see that being a logical thought. Oh, there must be somebody, some vagabond just hanging around. But they would always go out and no one would be there. And this would happen over and over and over again. Things really started to pick up when they discovered boards with men's names written on the boards. It appeared that these boards were boards that would have been above hospital beds back when this inn was a Confederate hospital. And I guess that these names being revealed again to the public stirred up some spirits, because that's when things really started happening. There's a bedroom, a guest room in the Village Inn bed and breakfast called the Scarlet Room. And guests that stay there oftentimes talk about a female spirit in this room. In fact, it is written that one couple came down demanding to change rooms because the wardrobe opened itself up in the middle of the night. People also smell perfume in this room, and one guest said that they saw a hairbrush floating in the room. Holy crap. Now in the angel room, another guest room, people say that they see the face of a young boy in a bedside table. Now the real creepy thing is when this boy tries to speak, he disappears. In the ballroom suite, people often hear laughter of children and the sounds of a party when there's absolutely nobody in the ballroom suite. And other common phenomenon that happens is people will be taking a bath and candles will be pushed into the bath, and they'll hear the rattling of chains on their door at night, and doors will open and close by themselves, as well as lights turning off and on by themselves. So if you really want to have a paranormal experience, I definitely suggest checking out the Village Inn Bed and Breakfast. Maybe ask for the Scarlet Room. That seems to be a pretty active room. All right, so let's move on to some more ghosts. So remember, I told you that in 1928, they started work on the chiseled picture that is on the side of Stone Mountain of Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, and Stonewall Jackson. Now, if you remember, I told you they didn't finish and complete this project until 1970. So it started in 1928 and it ended in 1970. Well, apparently a couple of people working on this installation died. I can see how that's possible. That rock is like straight up and down. So apparently these spirits also haunt Stone Mountain. Okay, now on to our next hauntings, which happen at the Antebellum Plantation or Historic Square. So this historic square, Antebellum Plantation, is this literal village of all these restored and relocated houses that have been around Georgia in the antebellum times. Now, here's a little interesting piece of trivia. This ties it into our Gone with the Wind episode. So there was an actress in Gone with the Wind named Butterfly McQueen. She played the character of Prissy. Prissy had a very famous line, "I know nothing about birthing no babies." And this actress, Butterfly McQueen, went on to host the Antebellum Plantation for a while. How extraordinary. I think that would have been awesome to have her host me if I was touring in that time. And honestly, same girl. I don't know nothing about birthing no babies. Now, Antebellum Plantation or Historic Square is located in the north side of the park. And we're going to start with what is said to be the most impressive of all the mansions in the Antebellum Plantation area, and that is the Dickey House. So the Dickey House, they say, was built around circa 1840. Now the house itself overlooks a field where they do reenactments of the Civil War. I'm assuming most Americans know what that is. It's not really my thing. I love history, but I'm not really into reenactments. For those who are from other countries, maybe don't know what I'm talking about, from time to time, people will go and dress up in these costumes, and they'll go all over the United States, or especially the East Coast, where battles for the Revolution were fought, battles for the Civil War were fought, and they will reenact these very famous battles. I believe they do a lot at Gettysburg. I'm not 100% sure, but I know that they reenact the Gettysburg battle a lot. I'm not sure if they actually do it on the land proper. But right behind the Dickey House, actors will come, or reenactors, and some will dress up as Union soldiers and some will dress up as Confederate soldiers, and they will play out the battles. Now, of course, they don't use real guns or cannons. No one dies. It's all pretend. It's all acting. But a lot of the people who do these reenactments say that when they look up at the Dickey House, they oftentimes see a woman standing in the window watching the battle happen. And then when they go into the house, there's no one there. Now our next haunted house at the antebellum plantation is the Thornton House. And the Thornton House is one of the oldest houses in Georgia. It was built around 1784. And for the haunting at this house, there are no records to say who this preteen girl is, but a house that old with so many people that have lived in it, things are bound to get lost. So apparently people see a preteen girl standing up in the landing in the wings of the house, and she has the propensity to like to pull the hair of other preteen girls. The staff who work at the Thornton House often say that this little girl does not like the dark. And when they go around and turn the lights off for the night, she gets pretty upset. There's also the story of perhaps a woman that haunts the house. And there is a child I read in a book where a child was walking up the stairs and then said, okay, and turned around and walked back down. And the mother asked the child, why didn't you go up the stairs? And the child said, because the lady told me not to. And of course, there was no lady standing on the stairs. Now, the last haunting we're going to talk about is the haunting of the coach house. The coach house is built from the bricks of two old houses and is now the office for the people who run Historic Square Antebellum Plantation. So a lot of the employees say that when they go downstairs, they hear people upstairs, and then when we come upstairs, they hear what sounds like children running around and playing. And of course, we also don't have any records for that as well, because these are the remains of what were two older homes. There are more stories than what I have told you, but those were the most common ones. And especially since I don't have a whole lot of records to go by, I wanted to find the stories that multiple people have experienced. So, have you been to Stone Mountain? Have you seen any of the ghosts? And like I said earlier, I don't tend to go to Stone Mountain that often living down here in Atlanta. But this makes me want to go and see some of these sites once our quarantine is lifted. Now, a day pass into Stone Mountain, I believe, is about $20, and that's just per car. So if you go with a friend or a spouse, then it's even cheaper per person. Now, of course, a lot of these separate rides cost a little bit more, but there are some museums there. I think there's like a nature museum that are free, and of course, all the hiking trails, once you're inside of the park, are free as well. All right, guys, I know that was a long one today, but you can't have a channel called Esoteric Atlanta without covering Stone Mountain. Thank you guys for once again sitting through this story. Once again, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, tell your friends. If you have a business that has a unique history, or if you have somewhere you want me to cover, send me a message on our Instagram page. Our Instagram page is Esoteric Atlanta. You can also follow us on Instagram as well, so you will be notified through Instagram when new videos drop too. Again, I want to thank Josh McKay for doing our music and Todd Roderick for helping me edit. And thank you guys all for being a part of our awesome community. I will see you soon. Bye.